Hi, my name's Steve Hunt. I'm the chief expert for work and technology at SAP, and I'm excited about this conversation today with my friend and colleague, Kevin Copithorne, who we've worked together for quite a while, to talk about some of the things he, and to a lesser degree I, have learned about implementing HR technology and using HR technology that go beyond the technology and the actual governance and processes to support technology. So Kevin, thanks for joining this conversation and just sharing me some of your thoughts. Can you tell us a little bit for the audience, your background and kind of the perspective you have on this?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Steve, for having me. It's great to see you again. Yeah, so I've basically been working in the HR technology space for about 25 years. I started in doing implementations. I was employee 133 with Success Factors back in the day. I went on to work for clients on the inside as part of corporate HR, and then later moved into working for management consulting firms in this space, both boutiques as well as the tier ones. And yeah, so basically my interest in digital transformation and digital transformation success has really been, I've learned a lot of things along the way. I've noticed a lot of the common challenges that HR teams have had in terms of really, establishing a digital identity relative to their IT
Mhm.
counterparts. And so yeah, so with those common challenges, that's really what led me to, launch my own consultancy, Digital HRX, to help organizations build digital proficiency and ultimately just be more successful at this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I love this digital proficiency because, when you've worked in this field as long as we have and seen so many different customers, you do realize that companies are huge differences in sort of the capabilities to use technology to wrap their heads around. And I'm not being critical of that, but it is a real skill set. It's like an organizational skill set,
Mhm.
and often it's new. And what was fascinating and led to this sort of conversation is you were sharing me some of the research that you've done. So can you maybe start by defining first what exactly is digital proficiency, and then we'll dive into some of the stuff you learned about, why some companies are or are not proficient.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so for definitions, I think it's good to talk about proficiency, but also let's make sure we ground ourselves in what is digital transformation and how do we define success. Basically, digital proficiency is the ability to leverage and integrate technology to integrate, personal and organizational efficiency in HR professionals, and ultimately delivering business value. That's what the proficiency piece is about. Digital transformation is where we basically use digital technology as the backbone for new products, new services, new ways of operating, and new business models. So from an HR point of view, it's like taking a success factors or some other HRIS as that backbone and bolting on extension systems to help make it more robust where it needs to be, and but ultimately looking at the process and the people side of that as well. So that's the digital transformation side of things.
Yeah.
And then in terms of how we define success, well, basically, how well do we as delivery teams make sure that we're delivering the target value that was planned for at the start when we go live, and then how and can we sustain positive change well past that delivery date? So
Yeah.
that's those are
I,
key things.
I like the concept too of like using technology to achieve sort of the goals of HR and workforce management. And I've definitely seen that difference that HR is a technology field now, at least in any large organization. The way you apply HR expertise is through the leveraging of technology to sort of like to say, get that expertise out of the heads of HR people into the hands of managers and employees that actually use it. And definitely see big differences in how much HR people and even HR organizations as a whole think of their strategies through the lens of technology and how's the technology going to support that. But I also see the same thing on IT sides where they're like a lot of technology. When I look at a traditional HR IT, often it was an IT person who supports HR but doesn't really understand HR.
Exactly.
Or it's an HR person who has to use this technology but really embrace it, as opposed to having somebody who really understands not just what the technology is capable of, but why it matters And I kind of joke about it. It's a person who gets excited about the release notes for like a success factor system because they know why it matters and they're excited about what they
Yeah,
can do. Now, you've done a bunch of research. I mean, but you've had a lot of experience personally, helping big companies implement, become digitally proficient. But you also did a bunch of research where you dug into it and you kind of identified the reasons why companies struggle to achieve this. Can you just share a little bit of that?
totally. Yeah. Yeah, so basically, I had a little window of time between a couple of contracts, so I spent some time reading some
Mm,
books and looking at a lot of articles, specifically on why digital transformations fail. Because the fact is, only 30% of organizations succeed. So that's a huge failure rate for something as important as digital transformation. So when I looked at the research, I looked at a dozen articles, and this is from research journals from the management consulting firms, from IT and HR publications, and I did some basically a thematic analysis. So here's the reasons I'm seeing, and let's find out
mm.
what the count is across those articles. And so I'll share with you, the findings of that with a circle diagram that
Cool.
kind of pulls it all together. And
It's coming up. There it is.
here you go.
I love it.
Yeah, so basically this kind of shows the top 12 reasons that I found in the research. The red circle on the outside as an example represents talent gaps, where the lack of skills and experience delivering these transformations. That was the number one reason why these transformations failed. And that's a full red circle. As compared to the inner circle, there were two citations there around data management. Still a reason why
Mm.
these things fail, but not as commonly identified in the research. So yeah, so here's a few of those obviously pretty key themes as to why organizations are struggling today.
Yeah, well, I think, and we don't have time to go through all of these, but I just have some questions. One, I think that's really interesting because often what people talk a lot about is the data management stuff, which is absolutely critical. But to your point about talent gaps, when you look at talent gaps, did you identify like what is the skill that they typically don't have? Like when you're going to look at a company to become digitally proficient and they say, okay, we got to make sure we got the talent to do this. What is it they should be looking at? What are the skills that really make a big impact in that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're basically talking about HR having to operate and straddle the into the IT world. So having things like really, digitally savvy leaders, having digitally savvy, project managers that understand the HR side of the house as well as the technology world. Not having business analysts, inside HR that can really help understand, what are the key journeys and personas that go into really capturing a great employee experience. So those are, I guess, just a few examples of what's really required today to move the needle on transformation success.
As you're talking, I think one of the things too is recognizing that often you are going to have to build these skills. But what I've seen big differences in implementations where some of the best, not just implementations, but ongoing success of using the product in the implementation, part of it was we're going to build that skills that because there's two kinds of implementations. Sometimes companies bring together like a project team and they do the implementation and they disband after the implementation. More effectively is where I've seen companies say, we're going to do this implementation. Often they're usually working with partners to do it, but we're going to have people in the company that are going to get upskilled through the implementation and are going to
Mhm.
stay on to run the system. So the implementation, a big part of it is building that or is filling that talent gap. And
Absolutely.
that's, a way of thinking about it. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like and in fact, that's often one of those goals that's identified at the start of a program. Unfortunately, we don't usually operationalize that enough. And so as a result, the vendors come in, they do their analysis, they do their configuration, and a lot of times they'll actually, when they're rolling off, there goes all that tacit knowledge from the project out the
Mhm.
door. So as much as we talk about it as organizations, as HR teams, it's actually one of the bigger challenges we have to make sure that upskilling of our employees happens as one of the outputs or one of the key objectives of the program.
Yeah, it's almost like we should define technology implementations also as skill building implementations, and I think
Absolutely.
companies don't think of it that way. The other one that is goes the circle that goes all the way around here is program strategy. Can you talk a little more about that one?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of times when we do these projects, we think of, oh, we're going to implement a module. Let's wrap a project team around that and make it
Mhm.
happen. I mean, program strategy is where we really put a lot of energy up front. So before we even do a phase one implementation or a phase two, phase zero is where we actually build out the program charter. This is where we do the vision. This is where we set up the goals and the objectives. How are we going to measure success, value realization at the end of the launch, so that we can actually capture and then demonstrate to our stakeholders that we actually achieve the value that we intended to set, that we set out to achieve. That's the kind of things that are captured in program strategy. And again, that's one of the key areas where organizations are coming up short.
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about because I mean, like you and I have seen so many implementations, and I see often where it's a big failure is that the person that is involved in kind of selling the deal, if you will, right, deciding to commit to it, is not the one involved in the implementation. And there's not a good job of like when companies decide they're going to implement technology, they do a lot of, value analysis and the objectives, but then when they implement it, they sort of hand it to a whole different group, and often that stuff falls through the cracks. Plus, time changes. Sometimes you'll have months, sometimes even years between the decision to implement a technology and the actual implementation of it. And in our world now, 6 months, a lot can happen in 6 months. So revisiting that really, I think, is really important. The last one that you have before we move on, because it's just an interesting one, is can you talk about it going all the way kind of into the circle, PMO capability? What is that?
Yeah, so the project management office, or digital PMO. So this is basically setting up a team within, ideally within HR, but in many cases it could be driven from IT. But basically standing up again during that program or that phase zero stage, standing up the project management office so that we've got a standard set of tools, templates, and methods for delivering digital HR projects, where we've got, the teams, the roles, the role mandates defined, so that when we go from one, project to another or one phase to another, we've got a rinse and repeat approach to delivering these projects. So a lot
Well,
of organizations don't have those.
no, and that kind of gets into, I think, the next thing is you're talking about this, that the implementation of technology, if you want to be digitally proficient, it is an organizational change. It's not just we're turning on a technology, but you really need to say we're also going to change the organization. We're going to build new skills. We are
Hmm.
going to build new functions, probably new roles and new structures.
Hmm.
Now that's the other thing that you shared when we were talking about that you've done a lot of look too. When you look at a company that is digitally proficient, how do they tend to be structured versus how maybe traditional HR organizations were structured?
Yeah. So traditionally, we're usually operating in silos. We've got HR, they know the HR function, and then you've got IT and they
Hmm.
know technology. So you've usually got them working together, and oftentimes it's in silos, and often there's a lot of role confusion. There's a lot of dependencies, and then there's a lot of delays in decision making and that sort of thing.
Do you
So
have like you have that graphic you can
yeah,
show me? Can you show? Because I
I
think
I
this.
totally do. So what's happening here? I'm going to switch to my next slide here, or at least attempt to. Is the delivery model taking a look at
Mhm.
how organizations are set up to be effective. So I'm just going to share a couple of examples. These aren't these are just examples. They're not how it should be. But a good place to start is to just take a look at, what's the typical HR organization look like. This is what's considered a fairly high performing one, where you've got HR leadership and business leadership at the top, and then you've got, your communities of expertise, your business partners, and this group here called HR operations. This is typically where digital HR happens. So
Mm.
this is where, like I say, typically HR would have their business reps here. and then they would partner with folks outside of HR in IT
Mhm.
to deliver digital projects. What we're starting to see, not and HR is a bit of a laggard in this. For them, in general, it's in other functions of the business. This is more common, where you actually see an integrated delivery model where you have the function, i.e., human resources, integrated with the IT team. So in this case, the product team and the platform team coming together under one team, one integrated team to deliver these projects. So this is what I'm starting to see just in the last couple of years, organizations moving to this more integrated model. So you have very agile teams that can make
Mhm.
decisions themselves. They don't have to go up the ranks through IT and through HR
Mhm.
to get things done. They're very self-managing, and they've got, as long as they've got clear mandates and boundaries, they can operate very effectively.
So when you look at this, so the PMO team, that's, the sort of project management team. What's the difference between the product team and the platform team?
Yeah, so the product team is basically, this is the another HR functional team.
Mhm.
So we're starting to see the word product come out, where we're basically treating the function as a product. So you're going to have a product manager, someone who, say, for example, owns the talent acquisition function, and they'll basically be responsible for the strategy, for the product roadmap, um, making sure that the customer requirements are defined, and they'll be there all the way through the implementation, and they'll even be there post implementation to make sure that the enhancement requests coming in are going to get factored into those product roadmaps. So they will have a lifespan, and they'll have a maturity curve,
Mhm.
that will continue to grow over time. So that's the
Mhm.
product team. The platform team, this is the traditional, more IT side of the house. But these are the folks that care about things like security. These are the ones and roles they're going to care about, building the integrations, custom builds. You'll see a lot of agile, methods happening. And so Scrum Masters would be part of this team. But they'll be led typically by a number of different platform managers. And so your technical developers and those sort of folks will be
Mhm.
on that side of the house.
Yeah, well, I like that how you define and have them like really established to work together because, working for SAP, we support both sides of these, but a lot of the products that our customers use come from our partners. But those products have to plug into this core platform. Like an analogy I've often heard used is, the platform team is like the group that organizes, that manages the house, the central, the electrical system, the
Hmm.
plumbing, and all of that. And the product team is the one that puts in appliances and things like that, which may change often more frequently than that core thing. But, the appliances you can put in your house depend on having the right electrical system and how it's plumbed and all that other things. And having these two teams defined, but also defined how they need to work together effectively. But what about the third one that's up there, the digital HR delivery office? What is that? And how does that tie into product and platform?
Yeah, so basically this is the HR, this is the group within HR that's responsible for, delivering a great employee experience. This is your steerco, or your operating committee would be part of that potentially. This is where, the team is really accountable for making the ultimate decisions around what are we prioritizing from an HR point of view, and what are we going to fund.
Hmm.
So they themselves have challenges as well. One of those challenges identified earlier was underfunding programs, digital
Hmm.
programs. That happens up here in the digital delivery office.
So making sure, yeah, so it's sort of like if I go too far with my housing analogy, the platform team is the one to make sure the core foundation electrical system works. The product team are like the contractors that put in new cabinets or new dishwashers or stuff like that. And the digital delivery office is the overall general contractor architect that makes sure this thing is all set and we have enough money to do it. But they need very much working together, which I think I like that this idea of having this as an ongoing, maintained group that comes together on a regular basis because often I find the people in the digital HR delivery office function don't really understand the capabilities or limitations of the technology, or conversely, the people in the technology don't understand why the digital HR delivery office might be interested in new features and functionality. So making sure that they're really actively working together, because what I often say is, our understanding of technology enables and constrains our imagination of how we can do HR. And the technology is moving so fast too, and the nature of HR is moving so fast that there's no one person that can master all three of these areas.
No.
You really need these groups to come together to be interacting with each other and collaborating, as opposed to the old model. And I actually heard somebody say this to me years ago, technology should not define HR processes. And that's like stupid, because our understanding of technology defines our imagination of what HR processes might be. And then what's sustainable and scalable depends entirely on fitting with the technology. So I really like this model of something you set up and establish and maintain, as opposed to just getting an implementation done to say, we're always going to be doing more implementation. So we need to have that going ongoing. What about when you've done a lot of work with a lot of different companies to build this out, to create this? When you see this, the other thing you shared was looking at the risk factors in this area when you create these teams. What is it companies should be aware of?
Yeah, so if we move forward with a model like this that's nice and integrated, we I'm going to just skip ahead, because these slides, by the way, are going to be available for folks
Hmm.
to take a look at, that help define the pieces and the spaces. But yeah, if we take those same teams, they're basically running across the top of this spreadsheet. Um, we can basically start thinking about those risk factors and who's ultimately going to be accountable or responsible for addressing them or managing them. And whether you call these risk factors or whether you call them digital capabilities, I don't care. We just have to make sure that there's clear ownership and accountability for dealing with them, so that the business can be successful. So I've got color coding here. I use the categories of strategy and governance in red or light red. In green, we've got people and culture. In yellow, we've got process and design. And then in blue, we've got technology and data. So these risk factors, colored by those categories, we're really just trying to flag, all right, which team's really ultimately accountable for this stuff to make sure it's successful, so that we know that that digital delivery team is really tight on what is the program strategy. They're running that portfolio. They're accountable for the funding and justification and working with the C-suite to get that approval. This is what they really have to focus on. Same thing with leadership and governance. How can you have, digital leaders making multi-million dollar decisions about technology if they are not digitally savvy leaders? So
Hmm.
these kinds of things become much more, apparent in terms of their importance of addressing, for these things to be successful.
Yeah, and I like the I like having the clear definition of roles, but also coming back to the fact that they need to be interacting and talking constantly. So if you look at like a program strategy, it's going to be affected by the overall technology strategy, and having those ongoing discussions, but also having a clear understanding of who needs to focus on all these areas, because no one group can possibly do it all.
No.
And having a really clear framework of it's kind of like a sports team. We have defense and we have offense, but we all work together. I think that there's
Hmm.
I like how you laid this out. Now, the thing that you've done that I found really pretty fascinating, building off your work, is you're working with companies to help them become digitally proficient, manage these risks. How do you do that? If a company's like, okay, this makes sense, and we need to go from whatever level we're at now to becoming digitally proficient, what's the process that you take organizations through to kind of navigate this path?
Yeah. No, great question. There's no, I mean, I guess I like to think of things being as prescriptive as possible, because then you can follow a recipe and then do a rinse and
Hmm.
repeat. So I have had a chance to work in the capacity as the digital PMO HR, I guess transformation lead, with several good-sized implementations And yeah, so I've had a chance to try all this stuff, and it's worked out pretty well. So basically, I go through an assessment phase, with the organizations, because we want to make sure we understand, um, you know, what is their readiness for digital transformation? Are they set up for success? Are there some obvious gaps we need to address? So with that, a good starting point is hey, looking at those risk factors, how are you set up against those risk factors? Do you have the capabilities in those areas, or are there some obvious gaps we need to address? So that's kind of the first one. Looking at the digital governance. So how are you set up in terms of ownership around the different HR functions or products? Um, and who owns the strategy? Who owns the process? Who owns the data to make sure that it's going to be clean? So there's
Mhm.
governance there. There's also the digital delivery governance we've talked about just before. So what are the challenges and opportunities there? Taking a look at the digital landscape, it's amazing how many organizations don't even have a clear inventory of what systems are in place today. The concept of shadow HR systems and shadow HR support teams for those systems are running, that's rampant. And that's a ton of, um, a lot of organizations would refer to that as technology debt, or having all these third party systems that don't have plugins to the core HRIS
Mhm.
system. Those are huge risks, challenges, and obviously opportunities for organizations to look at. And then finally, rolling that all up into some kind of a business case. And this is an important piece because it does get back to things like the underfunding of programs and not having good governance and leadership support. We have to make it simple for leaders to understand why we want to do these transformations, why we need to do these transformations, and to be properly set up for success. And so that's why some form of a business case that spells all of this out, and ideally that can even attach real dollars to, is a
Mhm.
great is really an important step.
So I think these steps, I mean, you've done this with many organizations. Just in general, what are the problems that are the most common? If you had to say, just not knowing a company at all, and somebody said, "Hey, we are struggling with our digital proficiency. We're, going to do a big implementation of technology." What would you just say? What's the thing that everyone say, well, this is what a couple of the main reasons why companies struggle. What would it be they should be
Yeah.
focusing on the most?
Well, interesting. I just did this digital capability assessment. I actually ran a session in December with a bunch of HR professionals, senior HR professionals, and so these were some of the things that came up for them. Um, Not having the PMO or a good delivery operating model, change management was pretty key, and not doing target operating models, and also not really having a clear tech strategy. So those were some of the key themes that came out from doing that digital assessment. When it came to the digital governance, yeah, lots of organizations struggle with having clarity around who's responsible for what. How does IT and HR work together? Who's responsible for what?
Mhm.
Who owns the vendor relationship? I worked for an organization where IT owned the vendor relationship. And so the only time the HR team could ask questions of those vendors around capability, they had to get an invitation from the IT team to do so. So these kinds of dependencies are things that are definitely problematic on that front. And then from the digital landscape point of view, I think really understanding where that debt is, how does that actually translate into dollars and cents and risk, clarifying what those gaps are, and then ultimately with the readiness report is just really understanding the clear and simple business case for moving forward.
Yeah, and that so you're talking so many of these again, you see just are interconnected. I think that often on why companies don't have a clear technology strategy is they don't have a clear balancing of HR and IT roles, or they don't at least, that really thinking through these. Just sort of the last question as we're wrapping up is, what does great look like? If a company's doing this really, really well, what's your you earlier showed what the structure of the organization should look like, but like, how does it operate? What's the ideal goal?
Yeah. So in terms of how we roll these things out, um, yeah, ideally it's gonna let's look something similar to this. There's variations on this for sure,
Mhm.
but having a program planning phase where you get your digital house in order,
Mhm.
set up the right strategy, the right governance, stand up your PMO, make sure you've done good discovery so you know what solutions necessary, how you're going to have to augment that solution with supplementary technologies, and then ultimately knowing that solution, what's it going to take to implement that thing? And so that means what's your approach, what your resources are going to look like, what's that going to cost the organization, all of that stuff happening first, then getting into your phase one, your phase two, your phase three. Because it's a lot easier for an executive team to sign off on that big budget if they know what that 2 or 3 year roadmap looks like and why
Mhm.
before they take the plunge. And then this is just really showing the different teams along the left here, the different work streams and the types of roles that are involved in delivering those activities. The chevrons are really just showing, which work stream is primarily responsible for that. The circles represent the supporting teams.
Mhm.
And then you can see here with the little people that the fact is we actually want those vendors involved in that upfront planning. We don't want to just bring them in at arm's length when it's time to configure, because they're the ones that are helping us understand best practices. They're helping us understand the constraints of the software so that we're coloring inside the lines when we're making our great design, decisions.
Mhm.
Again, just to be more efficient and more effective. So they really do need to be an integrated part of that solution.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that it really is a relationship, especially in a world of cloud technology. That historically, some companies would like, oh, keep the vendors out of this. And then when we figure everything out, we'll bring them in. And that doesn't make sense because the vendors have information that would influence how you would make these decisions. Plus, the more they know about what you're trying to achieve, the more that they're able to sort of figure out how they can help.
Mhm.
And really, so much of this to me is it's like an ongoing collaboration as opposed to historically it was like, well, we're going to define this, throw it over the wall to somebody else, throw it over the wall to someone else. But really look at it as an ongoing partnership, both internally with that connection between the project management organization, the HR leadership team, the HR specialist and the technology specialist and the platform specialists, bringing those all together. But I like the way you've also bring the vendors in because I think this is also one of the things driving. Somebody might say, well, they just want to sell us stuff. But in a cloud world, what they really need to drive is renewals. And renewals come from successful use of the technology. It creates a different partnership with
Mhm.
organizations and trying to get out of the more traditional, very transactional arm's length relationships a lot of companies had towards their technology vendors.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Kevin, I want to thank you for sharing this with us. And as we're sort of wrapping up, and we'll have in the notes with this video links to the slides and things like that. But any last advice or thoughts that you would give to people out there that are trying to become digitally proficient or maintain their digital proficiency?
Yeah, well, by all means. I mean, I think a key first step and a simple step is just assess where your strengths and gaps are. Uh, the assessment I've put together, I'm more than happy to make that available for folks if they're interested. They can send me an email. We can make sure that link is available. But it's just kevin@digitalhrx.com. That's a great starting point. It's free, and you can just see right away where some challenges are. Take a look at your delivery model. How are your teams set up today? What are the friction points? Are there some obvious things you can do to help, people work more effectively together? Also, take a look at that digital landscape. Do an inventory. That's an easy thing to do. You just got to reach out to your systems teams, find out what's out there, and find out what's working, what's not working. Are these systems really critical, or are they nice
Hmm.
to have? Are they potentially things that could be supported by your HRIS?
Hmm.
Those are some of the things we really want to take a look at. Obviously, building a business case is a critical piece, as we've talked about. And I guess another final one I'd suggest is engage your partners, your vendors. and see, you've been working with them already. Maybe they've got ways in which they can help you develop your digital proficiency as well. Because if you're already working with them, why not leverage that,
Yeah.
But by all means, feel free to reach out with any questions. I'm happy to help and point folks in the right direction as well. And I've also got a couple of blogs on the topic that will share links to
Awesome.
those as well.
Wow. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and doing the work to provide this framework and understanding. And it is, it resonates so much person who's also spent most time in his career. How many great solutions and great ideas fail, not because it was the technology or the idea, it was the execution. And there's a right way to work together with this stuff. And I think, a lot of organizations still haven't made this shift to what it's like to live in a digitalized, highly technology focused HR world. The way that I like to talk about it is we used to think about HR technology like building houses, we're going to design it and install it. Now it's changing so fast, we're cultivating gardens, and either they're growing in a healthy way or they're dying or being overgrown, but you've got to actively maintain them. And that's really what this is about. So, Kevin, thanks so much. It was a really great conversation.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciated it.